Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Dan Shay, the debut album, titled Where It All Began. Well, I should have seen this coming at some point. And really, after the runaway success of Florida Georgia Line last year, it was all but inevitable that major labels would start hunting for other duos that could fill the country mold. Frankly, I'm surprised I haven't tackled more groups of artists in this vein. I mean, last year was Parmalee, and they were more of a band, and well, this year we had Sunday Best, but they weren't remotely close to the sort of country music that gets popular, and they were actually pretty damn awesome. But outside of them, country and bro country in particular has been most of the genre of solo male artists in the vast majority. And despite many of them copying the same tropes and formulas over and over again, you could almost lay out a spectrum of how they present themselves. And well, I'd be tempted to call that spectrum between crap and not quite crap. That's not really fair or representative of an interesting difference that I find within the subgenre, and that is how the acts present themselves. Let's face it, as much as some bro country artists want to come across as swaggering alpha male douchebags, it's not indicative of the entire genre. And there are some artists who are looking to opt a more sensitive side. And sure, it doesn't always work, and some of the worst acts in bro country to try that particular approach have proven completely unconvincing, and that's often been the big problem. But given how many bro country artists are trying to pivot in this direction this year, it's interesting to see how the newest crop are going to try to make it work. So now let's enter Dan and Shay, a new country duo who started their career writing for Rascal Flatts before getting signed themselves. Now with their hit single 19 and You Plus Me, they've got a debut album and a fair amount of popular buzz behind them, especially on the charts, and the pop charts for one thing. So I gave their new album Where It All Began a listen and hope for the best, expecting the worst. How was it? Well, believe it or not, this album is actually better than you might think it would be. No joke, I expected going in for this album to completely, absolutely suck. And I was wrong. Where It All Began by Dan Shay isn't bad at all. Yet when I say that, it's under adjusted qualifications. Because in the majority of elements, these guys are barely a country band and are much closer to a pop country crossover act in the vein of Taylor Swift or even Keith Urban now. And judged on that standard, Dan Shay are actually pretty good. Not amazing or anything I'm going to find mind-blowing in a year or even in a month, but honestly, I enjoyed this album a lot more than I thought I would, and that is saying something. So okay, let's get all the issues on this album out of the way first, most of which are in the instrumentation and the production, because even on the standards of pop music, these guys write some pretty formulaic melodies, and coupled with some of the song topics that don't stray far from conventional love songs, especially in the country vein, it can make some of their material really start to run together outside of a few assorted musical gimmicks that they use to differentiate their songs. And plus, while I didn't mind some of the smoother pop production which did capture some of the real pluckiness in the guitars, which I did like, and did accent a couple of their better tracks, the electronic elements in the production and the auto-tune, look, they're not a good fit. It's always been a matter of cohesion. And while I'd argue it's a little bit more subtle than the blatant use of auto-tune on Jared Neiman's most recent album, it still doesn't flow very well with the more organic instrumentation. On top of that, while the duo has a better grasp of flow and rhyme scheme than most artists who brush with country rap, they do come across as ridiculously corny, and in songs in this direction like What You Do to Me, Somewhere Only We Know, and Party Girl, they're easily the weakest tracks on this album. And plus, I couldn't help but notice that their rhyming scheme reminded me a little bit of mid-period R. Kelly of all people. Knowing that particular comparison is completely unintentional makes the songs that much funnier for me. But okay, putting all that aside, even though Dan and Shay can be corny and more than a little bit ridiculous, they have one big redeeming element in their vocal delivery that ultimately pretty much saves this album: sincerity. Quite simply, there's not a trace of irony or leering debauchery in any of their delivery. It's all very honest, and they sell their corny material with the love-struck, almost boy band-esque honesty that makes them come across as honestly better than some of the boy bands out right now. On top of that, they have decent harmonies and pretty decent interplay with each other. And while I do wish Dan Smyer's got more lead vocals, which is richer, lower voice, he does add a lot of balance to the mix, which I did like. What's important here is that even even when the love songs, they do get kind of silly, and they do, it's so sincere that it's kind of hard not to buy into it, and it's really hard to hate it, and I just couldn't. Now that takes us to the lyrics. Now, as I've said, a lot of this material can start sounding very similar in terms of the songs about meeting / hanging out with girls. And you can tell that the lyrics are laser focused on cultivating a big, young female fan base. And let's be honest, songs like the acoustic Can't Say No, where he's so haplessly love-struck that he goes along with everything that the girl wants to do, and Nothing Like You, where he falls for the typical archetypal manic pixie dream girl you'd find in any downtown Toronto coffee shop, they're almost too ridiculous to take seriously or on any level of depth. But that being said, there are moments in the lyrics I did like. For instance, they do reference acts like Tom Petty, Bruce Springsteen, and George Strait. And while I'll argue they don't exactly incorporate many of their references into their songs instrumentally, it does add some lyrical flavor that can feel cohesive and not forced in the same way that when Luke Bryan references Conway and T-Pain and how it doesn't seem to fit. With Dan and Shay, you know what, I buy it. On top of that, Dan and Shay are at their absolute best when dealing with material that's a little bit less conventional love stories, or when they're talking about heartbreak. The two best songs on this album by a mile are First Time Feeling, which might as well be a remake of Summer Nights from Greece with sex and Springsteen references, and my personal favorite song on the album, I Heard Goodbye, a song where a relationship just fizzles out, and the song captures those complicated emotions pretty damn effectively. And sure, the country side of me, it's saying it's pretty tempting for me to look at the song as the light version of Goodbye in Your Eyes by the Zac Brown Band, but you know what? This song works for the same reasons that song does, and Dan and Shay, for me, they managed to sell it. So in the end, you know what? I liked this album. It reminds me of a Canadian pop rock act from the early 2000s called Wave that I actually really quite liked. I own their album. That they had one major hit up here with the song California, and they were also a duo who had well-harmonized songs with hit-and-miss production. And honestly, if Dan and Shay were simply the pop country version of Wave for 2014, I'm okay with that. So keeping all that in mind and keeping in mind how their audience will simply adore them, this album gets a 7 out of 10 from me and a recommendation. If you're a teenage girl, or hell, anyone who has a liking for the admittedly cheesy nature of decent boy bands from either the 90s or now, I recommend giving Dan and Shay a listen. You might find yourself surprised. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums coming out this year that you'd like me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark, and I'll see you next time.